Good afternoon. I'm Rowley Tambara. I run the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Today's meeting is quite unusual among the series of meetings that I've been running for the last 17 years for the Middle East program. We have with us Mr. Scott Moore. Michael has worked as an editor and reporter for Spiegel Online in Berlin and as a European correspondent for Miller McCune magazine, now Pacific Standard. He is the author of a novel, Too Much of Nothing, and a travelogue about surfing, Sweetness and Blood, which The Economist named a book of the year in 2010. Mr. Moore has been a Fulbright Fellow in Berlin and a grantee of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting in Washington, D.C. Today, he will discuss his 977 days, which probably seemed to him as 9,077 days as a hostage of Somali pirates. He has a gripping story to tell us, and his story compared to the story of those of us who were kept in solitary confinement or were taken as hostage, or our stories compared to his stories looked very pale and very civilized. So you're in for really a fantastic session, and I would like also to thank the Africa program at the Middle East Center, at the Wilson Center, which is a co-sponsor of today's meeting. You have the floor.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Dr. Esfandiari and the Wilson Center for having me. I talked to Dr. Esfandiari just briefly last spring about being captive and about Islam, and that's something I've been trying to grapple with because it should be un-Islamic to hold prisoners and treat people the way I was treated and the way Dr. Esfandiari was treated. But some guards in both of our cases were quite religious. Most of the pirates holding me prayed 5 times a day, and that surprised me because before I went to Somalia, I had the idea, I spent a long time studying piracy, and I had the idea from most experts that pirates in fact were irreligious. But that's not what I found. It maybe shouldn't be a surprise. A devout Muslim pirate is no more bizarre than a church-going member of the mafia, but it's interesting. So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today, along with 3 other myths that were shattered for me in Somalia. I know you're all probably also anxious to hear about the White House policy review. This is not a formal speech about that. It's just a number of remarks, but I'm happy to answer questions about it afterwards. I spent 2.5 years as a hostage in Somalia, and several myths came apart while I was there, not just about Islam, or about pirates in general, but also about one point of American hostage policy. I'm an author. I live in Berlin. I was obviously raised in America. You can probably tell from my voice. I have dual citizenship. And in late 2010, a group of 10 pirates went on trial in Hamburg for attacking a German cargo ship. That became a famous trial in Germany, or in Europe in general, because it was the first pirate trial on German soil in about 400 years. So I started to cover it for Spiegel Online, where I worked, and I noticed that a lot of the German public defenders in the courtroom, there were 20 of them, 20 lawyers in one room, claimed their pirates were just fishermen. They'd all been caught red-handed on a cargo ship with AK-47s by the Dutch Navy. But by the time they landed in the Hamburg courtroom, they had statements prepared claiming they were just poor fishermen. They had been press-ganged into working as pirates by the real violent people who were still in Somalia. And you know, you may have heard that story before, that pirates are just disgruntled fishermen who can't make a living anymore because there's so much illegal fishing off the coast of Africa. By now you may have noticed that I'm not a fishing boat, so that's not entirely true what they say, but that introduced me to a general rule about pirates, which is that it held in Hamburg as well as in Somalia. The closer you come to a real pirate, the harder it is to find one. Through some people in Hamburg, while I was covering the trial, I met a number of people who could actually help me get to Somalia, including one Somali elder in Berlin who had arranged security for other journalists. And I flew there with him and with one other excellent documentary maker named Ashwin Rahman. He's Indian-born, but he lived in Germany. He had a German passport. In fact, all three of us, the Somali elder, Mohammed, and Ashwin and I, were from somewhere else, but we were traveling to Somalia on German passports. We spent about 10 days in Galkayo, which is a small town in the center of the country that has turned into sort of a pirate transit point, if nothing else. It's well inland, but it's where a lot of pirates like to build their villas and that kind of thing. And most of the Somalis in Hamburg came from that town. We made one excursion out to Hobyo on the coast, which is a famous pirate nest, and we interviewed a pirate boss who made it sound as if his people, Somali pirates, were at war with Europeans and with the people who had dumped poison or radioactive waste on Somali beaches, which the Italian mafia has done, or with other Europeans who trawl Somali waters for tuna and that kind of thing, which Portuguese and French companies and also Asian companies have certainly done. He was full of legitimate complaint. Illegal fishing really is a serious problem up and down Africa, but in real life, pirates just grab what they can. They run an organized crime cartel, and they're motivated mainly by money. That should also be no surprise. We came back to Galkayo, and the way things happened, Ashwin decided to fly to Mogadishu. We decided to do everything together, so I went with him to the airport, and with security and with Mohammed. Word must have gotten around that we were there, or even that we were headed to the airport that day. And on our way back to the hotel room, Mohammed and I got stopped by a technical. Ashwin had flown away, but Mohammed and I and our guard in the car got stopped by a flatbed truck with a great big cannon on the back. Those are known as technicals in Africa. About a dozen gunmen filed off the technical and came around to my side of the car, pulled me out, beat me on the head, broke my wrist, bloodied my scalp, ripped my clothes, took my backpack. And we drove off into the bush for about 4 hours. The desert bush in Somalia consists mainly of thorn bushes and acacia trees and not much else. And we wound up in a spot not quite near the coast but not on the coast, with a sort of sandstone cliff, and there was a mattress waiting for me. So it was all very well organized. They knew I was coming. By then my glasses were gone. I normally wear lenses, and the glasses were broken. I would wind up being blind for the next 2.5 years. And they made me sit down on the mattress, and I was sort of vaguely aware of other guards and other hostages, actually. But I couldn't see very much. And the first thing they gave me was a little bit of bottled water, a can of tuna, and some bread. And that would, except for cooked rice and pasta now and then too, that would be my diet for the next 2.5 years. In the first couple of months, I lost 40 pounds. Those first few days were confusing, especially because I couldn't see very well. But I got to know one of those hostages who was there in that same camp very well, actually. There were two guys. They were both from the Seychelles, men in their 60s. And one of them was named Rowley Tambara. He was kind of a squat, comical guy who spoke a French pidgin that's normal on the Seychelles. And he and his friend Mark were fishing about 50 miles out from their home port in late 2011 when they got captured. a bunch of pirates came up with guns and boarded their boat and forced them to sail back to Hobyo. That trip took a whole week, which indicates how far out they were. And Seychelles lies in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They were no fewer than 700 miles away from Somalia. So that was one of my first impressions as a hostage. Two other hostages, poor African fishermen, captured near their home, distant from Somalia, hauled back to Hobyo, and held for the staggering sum of $20 million, which would be the demand for me too, by pirates who pretended to be disgruntled fishermen, oppressed by big industrial fishing boats and so on. So that was one myth exploded. 4 days after I got captured, the US launched a rescue mission to get 2 other hostages named Jessica Buchanan and Paul Tisted away from their pirate gang in a slightly different part of central Somalia. They were held by a group that was related but not identical to mine. And the pirates were keeping them in the open air. The SEALs crept up on their camp late at night, shot all their guards dead, and rescued them safely, and brought them back to Djibouti, which is a country north of Somalia, northwest. That completely freaked out my pirates, as you can imagine. They thought the rescue had something to do with me. By that time, they knew I was an American. Although I'd traveled on a German passport, they had done their research. And in those first couple of days, they were actually keeping us in a house. From the camp, we went to a house. And when the rescue happened, they pulled us out of a house, which is something I'll never understand. For the next few weeks, they actually kept us outdoors with surveillance planes flying overhead. And that's something I really don't understand. Although Jessica and Paul had been rescued out in the open, they kept Rowley and me out in the open, at least until it started to rain, and then they moved us back to a house. But after that rescue of Jessica and Paul, they stuck to their demand for $20 million for me for several months. I don't think they dreamed up that sum because they'd already demanded it for Rowley, but they stuck to that demand for a long time, I think, because the top boss in both of our cases lost somebody in the raid, lost a family member. So Rowley, the Seychelles fisherman, turned out to be a chatterbox. He was quite a wonderful guy. He told me all about life in the Seychelles, which when he was born was a British colony. In the 1940s, he said rich people rode bicycles in the Seychelles. Nobody owned a car, and everybody else walked barefoot. And he used to play football with a ball made out of banana leaves and that kind of thing. So he was quite a charming guy. But he told me a strange thing. He said he had seen my picture on one of the pirates' phones beforehand. Before they brought me to the camp, he had seen my picture, and a few of the men had actually disappeared, which means they had not only researched me, but were planning quite definitely to get me. And later I saw the picture. It was an author photo from my second book, which they obviously downloaded from a New York Times article. So they knew before I was captured that I was American. What surprised me over and over while I was there is that the pirates kept referring to getting money from the United States. This went on for a long time. American and British politicians like to say that we don't pay ransom, and because if we did, more and more Americans would be at risk. But the pirates holding me didn't know. My guards at the very least knew nothing, and the bosses, it's hard to say what they knew. But in any case, knowing that I was American was not a deterrence. What I did notice was that they went to several different sources for ransom almost right away. They obviously contacted the US government, the German government, Der Spiegel magazine, which I had a connection with, and so forth. And they did that in other cases too. For a while I was held on an Asian fishing boat that the same group had captured. And when the negotiator came on board there, he asked for the same amount of money from the owners, from their families, and from their embassies. So in other words, they were asking for the same amount of money 3 times just to see what they could get. And I think they were doing the same thing in probably, I mean, I know they were doing the same thing in my case and also probably in Rowley's case. So it just became kind of a scattershot thing. They held somebody and then they looked for money. And my pirates, this really stood out. My pirates thought for a long time that the US government was going to pay. They thought an American means money. And I know that because one guard named Bashko, who became a friend of mine, would give me updates on negotiations. Whether they were accurate or not, I don't know. But he would come in and say, Michael, there's news. And then I would hear every month that I was about to go free. After a while, I quit taking him quite so seriously. But it wasn't until mid-2013 that he said, Michael, America, no pay. Which meant there was going to be, it was final, you know, the Somalis had finally decided it was true. They were not going to get money from America. That took 1.5 years, which was disconcerting because I honestly thought that it was true. America and Britain, it's well known to everyone that they don't pay ransom. Therefore, people in the kidnapping business must know that too. But they don't. Either they don't or they ignore it. My guards in particular weren't educated enough to know the difference geologically between, or geographically between Britain and France, for example. So they certainly didn't keep track of the difference in hostage policy. If the bosses did, they were cynical enough not to believe it. So that was the second myth exploded. American hostage policy, at least the way it's talked about, doesn't necessarily keep us safe. The pirates knew I was American to begin with. They targeted me on purpose, and they held out for money from the government, at least for 1.5 years, all in spite of what I thought of as a fairly famous hardline ransom policy. It's important because I think there's an idea in America that Europeans walk around with a sort of a target on their foreheads because of the softer line that European governments take. And I just think that's a myth. The greed involved in any kidnapping operation or hatred in the case of a terrorist group. My kidnappers were just criminals, not terrorists. The greed and the hatred are so enormous that these stated hostage policies actually become irrelevant. So that's 2 myths. Let me say a little bit more about Bashko because he, like I said, he was very clever, but he claimed not to be a pirate. He watched me every day with a Kalashnikov in his hands, and I knew him as long as I knew any pirate in Somalia. But when we talked about it on certain long afternoons, he would say, I'm not a pirate. He was just a guard. He was not one of the men who kidnapped me, probably true, but he was just doing what he thought of as good work, keeping me safe. But of course, he stood to make a lot of money from my ransom, so I talked to him about that. In fact, while I lay there, I thought about a ride I took on a warship some time ago. In 2009, I got on a Turkish frigate that was sailing a counter-piracy mission for NATO. And one of the Turkish officers said to me that pirates are probably not Muslim. The context was Ramadan. He said, I don't think they observe Ramadan because they can't take themselves seriously as Muslims if they're thieves. So I said that to Bashko. I said, look, you're a Muslim. He said, yes. He was very proud. He was a Sufi, like all the guards. They prayed around me 5 times a day. And I said, but you're also a thief. I said, these things don't go together. And he sort of laughed. He sort of understood what I said. And then he came back and said, well, you know, we guards, we're not pirates. We're keeping you safe. It's the bosses. And the bosses are not Muslim. Ali Dulai was one of the bosses, Mohammed Garfanji. He said, do you think those guys read the Quran? And so, of course, it was nonsense. But I heard a variation on that same line more than once. Good group, bad group, Muslims, not Muslims. We're keeping you safe from the real pirates over here, and so on. Well, of course, it's baloney because the pirate gang as a whole is very closed and quite paranoid about spies. So a boss would never hire people who are not true believers in the criminal enterprise. But it weighed on his mind. It took about 2 weeks, but Boschko finally came up with a reason that was quite surprising to me. But he said, you know, in the Quran it says to struggle against the infidel. Therefore, thieving from anyone who's not a Muslim is not theft. I said, I don't think it works like that. But that was his answer. That's what he truly believed. And you can say he wasn't a Muslim, but he would try to hurt you for saying that. That made me understand something else that was going on among the guards. Often they said to me and to other hostages something about eating ham, especially when I was held on the ship where we sometimes had pork. They would say, "Michael, you want ham?" I'm like, "No, I don't. I don't need ham." But there was obviously this idea among the guards in circulation that some of these hostages are pig eaters, and we would also drive through the bush sometimes and see like a wild pig. They have black and white furry wild pigs in Somalia, extremely ugly, and they would say, "Michael, ham!" As if I was going to go out there and eat one. And at first I thought it was a joke, but it was noticeable how many different, completely separate seeming groups of guards came up with the same joke. And that was something that I think the bosses had put in circulation among the guards to dehumanize us, as if to say that we are infidels, we're pig eaters, we're not worthy of any kind of respect. So even if they're inclined to be friendly with us, forget it. And that actually reminds me a little bit of the way ISIS or Daesh seems to be organized. What I've learned in the meantime since I went free last September is that the core of Daesh is also not very Muslim at all, in spite of the name, Islamic State. But they put these ideas, they're ex-Baathists and extremely cynical and brutal people, but they put these ideas in circulation that seems to motivate the foot soldiers. It's obviously they're not comparable organizations otherwise, but I notice a pattern. So Boschko, like I said, he was quite serious about that, and he said that it would have been haram to take a ransom from the families of 4 Muslim men on the fishing boat where I was held. 5 men were from Indonesia, 4 of them were Muslim, and he said, no, we can't take, we have to be scrupulous about that. But of course, I'm not under no illusions that his bosses would be. But that led me to a third busted myth, that pirates are somehow not Muslim. The guards certainly think they are. And it turns out that there's Barbary pirates centuries ago were no different. In the 1600s and 1700s, the great age of North African piracy, hijacking European ships belonged to a low-burning religious war across the Mediterranean, holding Christians for ransom or converting them was part of that tension between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. And it absolutely worked in reverse too. So the reason you find walled towns on the coast of Morocco is that ships would come down from Europe to sack Muslim towns and ships. So it absolutely worked in both directions. But you'd be forgiven for closing your eyes now and thinking that we've slipped back in time. In the end, it took 2.5 years for my family and a dedicated team of negotiators to get me out of Somalia. The ransom was about $1.5 million, and on my last day, the pirates, without warning, delivered me to the Galkayo airport, handed me off to a bush pilot, and I was able to fly out to Mogadishu, where I met some FBI agents and members of the German BKA, which is the German FBI. And I left Somalia finally in an Air Force transport plane. My freedom still feels like a miracle to me. For that miracle, I have to thank not just the FBI, but also the German BKA, the good people at the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, the good people at Der Spiegel magazine, who also worked tirelessly. A negotiator in California named Bob, he knows who he is. And my mother, who happens to be in the audience today. I'm still terribly humbled by what happened. I'm humbled by the horror of my kidnapping and the horror that it caused for so many other people for such a long time, but also by the astonishing help I received. It's something I'm not going to be able to forget. So along with these three myths, which the kidnapping managed to vaporize, I think there's another myth that's worth mentioning that at least in my own mind that I walked around with. I can't speak for anyone else, but I think before I went to Somalia, I went around, I thought I knew a thing or two about love. I thought that somehow I loved enough to get through an average day. You know. But after my kidnapping, my mind seemed to flip through the pages of my memory, almost like the cliche of your life passing through before your eyes, you know, before you die. Almost in slow motion it was happening, because I didn't know what was going to happen in those first few days. And almost as a way of hanging on to the person I was, I thought a lot about my own life and the people that I loved, and excuse me. There was a profound sense of having failed to love enough. And so if I can leave you with just one impression, I think that would be it. I have the strong suspicion that none of us love our families quite enough. And that may be one of the most popular myths we walk around with from day to day. So that if death gives you a few minutes to reflect on your life before you have to go, I'd suggest that maybe you might have the same impression, that you fell short, and that you should try to do a little bit more every day before that time comes around.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure that's not what you expected to hear from me today. So I can answer questions about the hostage policy review.
Michael, let me take you a bit back.
Yeah.
In the article you wrote for the Spiegel and Guardian, you talk about the day when they brought a group of you from the boat on shore, telling you that they are going to give you a plane ticket to leave. And that day ended up to be the worst day of your life.
That's right.
And because of what happened to Rowley, because of, you know, can you describe that? What was puzzling to me was that they suddenly produced a group of journalists, and one of them spoke very good English.
Yeah, that's right.
And the next day, there was a video for sale. So can you describe that day for us, please?
Yeah, that was one of the most harrowing days, and it was the first video that I made, the first proof of life video, which came something like 4 or 5 months after I was captured. I was being held on the boat at that point, and they took both Rowley and me off and then drove us into the bush the next day for a meeting with the top pirate boss, whose name was Mohammed Garfanji. And there was a great group of Somalis there, most of them, I think, high-ranking pirates, armed to the teeth, and a few kids who seemed to be journalists. And while I was there, they actually strung Rowley up by his ankles and beat him. And they did his video like that. So he was interviewed actually by Garfanji upside down. I think they did the video before I was led out to see him, but they led me out to see him being beaten. And then they did a video with me, which wound up being, I think, the only known video of me from Somalia out of that 2.5 years period. We did 4 or 5 videos, but that was the only one that got out. And the person interviewing me was Mohammed Garfanji, the boss and the guy who was doing the beating. Absolutely harrowing and totally unexpected. I didn't see that coming, and neither did Rowley either.
I thought it was amusing when you wrote that they put a pink blanket on your head.
Yeah.
So Hoping that the Americans would not trace you from the air?
Exactly. They did that often on the boat too. They would. I had a pink blanket that I had to sleep with, a blanket with flowers on it, and they made me carry it everywhere. And when I was out in the open, they thought, well, there's probably aerial surveillance. They don't want me to be recognized, so they wanted me to put the blanket over my head. So I'm interviewed on that video with the blanket over my head. I had a beard, so I'm not sure they really thought I was going to look like a lady from up above, but I think that's kind of the idea.
Was there a, was there a moment when, you know, you again described for the first couple of months, you would hear helicopters and planes flying over the place you were, but then it stopped. Was there a moment when you sort of gave up hope that, you know, they will never find you?
Yes. I heard periodic surveillance aircraft through the whole time, but after the first year or so, I was held alone inside in houses, and so after too much time, basically in solitary confinement, I started to give up hope. Yeah, because I thought if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen in the first several months, and after a while, I stopped. By 2014, I stopped actually thinking I was going to get out.
We open the floor to your questions, please. Yes, David, please wait for the mic. Thank you.
Dave Ottaway, I'm here at the Woodrow Wilson Center.
Yeah.
You said when you got out that there was an FBI agent who met you. I think I understood you in Mogadishu. What did you learn? What was the FBI's involvement? Were they following your case, and what was the U.S. role as far as you could determine afterwards in helping you get out?
Support. They were extremely supportive of my family the entire time, and that's what's different in my case when you compare it to some of the other cases that led to this hostage policy review. We had a really good rapport with the FBI and a really good experience with them. I don't know what else to say about that. They were good about giving information to my mother. You know, they couldn't say everything, but when they couldn't say something, they also said that. They said, you know, we can't be completely honest about this or straightforward about this or that, instead of just saying nothing. And that's the mistake that other officials made in some of the other cases. I have to say that in my case, since it was criminal, there was less information that was blacked out. But I think my case was a pretty good example of the government working well with the family.
Yes, please. Just wait for the mic. Can you speak louder, please? I'm not sure whether this mic is working. Okay.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. I can imagine it takes a whole lot of courage to be here and share your story with all of us who are complete strangers to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I have two questions. One, in terms of preparedness, do you think there was anything that, did you do any kind of training? Was anything that prepared you to be able to identify signs that you were being watched or surveilled? And the second question that I have is, during your time there, I think once you mentioned in your article looking upon a weapon that belonged to one of your guards and just looking and wondering, should I not? So were there other moments like that where you thought about escaping or trying to put a strategy together, being on your own, or anything like that played through your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about it all the time. I didn't have any particular training. There are journalist training programs you can go through, and they're probably recommended, but I'm not sure they can really prepare you. The biggest thing that I should have prepared for was a hunger strike. I wound up mounting a few of them just to get the guards to behave better, and that took practice. There are psychological things that you may not be prepared for, you know. So I had to do that more than once to understand what I was getting myself into.
Yes, in the back. Thank you.
Aaron Lovell, I'm here at the Wilson Center. What happened to your fellow colleague and or your fellow captive and friend from the Seychelles? Was he released as well?
Rowley and Mark, both men from the Seychelles, were released near the end of 2012. Yeah.
How much did they have to pay?
There was a ransom paid. I think it was 1.5 each, 1.5 each.
But Michael, my sense was that he was a fisherman and not a so in his case, the government stepped in and paid too.
That seems to be the case.
Okay.
I'm not, but I don't know.
That's right. Yes, please.
My name is Mendelson. I'm a former State Department official. My question is a simple one. Why isn't there an international treaty that makes it illegal, totally illegal, to make private payments or public payments to redeem hostages? I'm very sorry for hostages, but my God, between Al-Qaeda and all of the other movements of that type, the administration's recent change of policy is going to do nothing other than encourage more seizures of the type that you went through. If we had an international treaty that was joined by the civilized nations of the world, all of them, we might be able to start avoiding situations like yours. And if we don't have that, there's going to be no way to do so, it seems to me. So I'm wondering what your comment is.
I'm not sure that's true. So that was the point of one of the myths that I talked about. I think that even if there were an international treaty, there are plenty of criminal gangs who would either ignore it or simply not know about it. The one deterrent is if there were an international treaty like that, would be to back that policy up with a consistent policy of rescue. That would be a real deterrent, because then it would get around pretty quickly to just about everyone, no matter how uneducated, that capturing a hostage could mean their own lives. So as far as that goes, I agree, but I don't think that a simple policy of non-payment will work, because there always have to be exceptions. Sometimes there's no other way to get a hostage out.
I'm sorry. No, wait, we'll get back to you. Michael, can you explain the change of policy today that you heard today from the White House?
Yeah, the main thing, I mean, the thing that made the headline yesterday is that Obama wanted to make it clear that under the new policy, nobody was going to get prosecuted for trying to pay. No families would get prosecuted for trying to pay to get their own relatives out. That's important, but that was also a big misunderstanding, evidently. I was in Somalia when that became a great big controversy, I think last spring. But they wanted to be real clear that laws against material support for terrorist groups would not be applied to families trying to get their own hostages out. And somehow it became trendy for government officials to tell families, especially the families of hostages in Syria last year, that if they moved to do anything to get their loved ones out, they could be exposed to criminal prosecution. I think making it clear that that's not American policy is really important, because evidently it was never true. Prosecution was never on the table for these families, but it made things so vague for some of the families that it took a long time for them to do anything and to get anything done, and the result was, in 4 cases, was brutal murder. There are other things that the president's trying to do, which is communicate better with families, which is very important. That was a lack of communication, if not worse. But and it's a matter of getting officials to understand what the goal of American policy is too. So I think after these changes, officials will know a little bit better what to say to families and how to tell them everything they need to know. and sharing information with them. So even in a terrorist case, there should be information that, even if it's classified, the families should be able to know. You know? So the president's trying. We'll see if it works. The great danger, I think, with these reforms that he just announced is that it'll add another layer of bureaucracy.
In cases like yours or for Rowley and some, who are the negotiators and at what stage do they come in?
Well, in Rowley's case, I'm not sure. His family was involved. He called his family quite often, but I'm not sure, come to think of it. But in my case, it was my mother. Most of the time. We also had other negotiators that came in and out. But she was supported. That's the important part.
Okay. Yes, here.
First, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm Mohammed from Yemen, the other side of Somalia.
Oh, yeah.
How will be related, I mean, the conflict in Yemen, how will be related or add more trouble to increase kidnaps and hostage in the Red Sea? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure in Yemen, but I know that before the conflict, Somalis were fleeing to Yemen to get work, maybe to go on to Saudi Arabia for jobs, but they were leaving Somalia because things were so bad. And now, because of the conflict, they're coming back. But the people who were moving them across were human traffickers. And they were essentially the same gangs. In some cases, they were the same gangs as the pirates. And when that flow of people moved across the Gulf of Oman from northern Somalia to Yemen, it was not just pirate gangs who were moving them, but sometimes the pirate boats. I mean, the skiffs, if you saw them, would look to anyone in this room like a pirate skiff, and that's what they were. I don't know. There have been a few kidnapping cases in Yemen, but I don't know the politics well enough to say whether it's only going to get worse. It sounds like it's been pretty chaotic, and a couple of people have been detained, but I think by the government in Yemen.
The lady in the back, yes, in the blue dress, yes.
I can just speak loud.
Wait for the mic, please. Yes, thank you.
I wanted to know if you could speak about whether or not there was any involvement by any of the African countries. We've heard of West African governments getting involved to free some French families that were kidnapped by Boko Haram, but was there any involvement by any of the Eastern African governments with the hostage policies?
No, not that I know of. In fact, I think there should have been a little more involvement from the Somali government, but they don't have much power outside Mogadishu.
Yes, the gentleman in the back. Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting. My name's Doug Brooks. I'm from the International Stability Operations Association. I guess my question would be on the deterrence effect of essentially lethal force or something. I think my impression of many of the Somali pirates is they were so desperate in terms of their own situation that going out to sea in skiffs 700 miles offshore was an acceptable risk. So really, would hanging pirates or anything actually have a deterrent effect on this kind of behavior?
Yeah, if it were consistent. The one deterrent effect that has worked is having armed guards on cargo ships. I think there was a fear in 2008, 2009 that that would lead to an arms race on the Indian Ocean, that the pirates would just, arm up and overcome whatever the armed guards had on a cargo ship, and it would just get worse and worse. That hasn't happened. Shooting at an oncoming skiff tends to scatter the pirates. They don't want to die. I think if there were a consistent death penalty, or that's a bit draconian, but if it were consistent and a pirate knew that if he got arrested in the Seychelles or in America or brought back to Europe, whatever, then yeah, that would be a deterrent. Right now, especially the way they were punished in Germany, there's no deterrent effect. They are desperate. I mean, it is a question of poverty, and illegal fishing is absolutely a problem. But the biggest thing that makes a young Somali desperate is a cot addiction, because that can cost $10 to $20 a day, which amounts to something like $600 a month, which is rent in some Western countries. You know, nobody can afford that in Somalia. So that's one major motivation. I didn't meet a single pirate who was not addicted to cot. So the fishing problem is, as a motivation for piracy, is a little bit less than people say.
Can you wait for the mic?
Thank you. Two questions for you. One, during your incarceration, did you ever feel threatened or see affiliation between the pirates and Al-Shabaab? And secondly, given the world focus fading away now from this area, in the next year or two, do you see a resurgence of Somali piracy? Thank you.
I never felt directly threatened by Al-Shabaab, and I never saw anyone who belonged to Al-Shabaab, but I was constantly threatened that I would be sold to Al-Shabaab. That was something that came out up in that first video that day that they strung up Rowley. They threatened to sell me to Al-Shabaab within an hour, you know, if the money didn't come. I got used to hearing that, but for the last couple of years I was held in houses in Galkayo, but I think I said this in my Guardian piece, but they told me I was in Haradere. First, they didn't want me to know where I was, but second, they wanted me to think that Al-Shabaab was just going to come through the window any time. So what the guards wanted me to believe was they were keeping me safe from Al-Shabaab. But I know I was in Galkayo because they have a commercial airport there, and we heard planes all day. The other question was whether there might be a resurgence. Right now, I think the most recent ship or two that have been captured by pirates over there have been fishing boats. And so what seems to be happening is more fishing boats are coming in more boldly close to the shore and doing something completely illegal, which is taking fish out of Somali territorial waters. And if they become easy, low-hanging fruit, yeah, I think pirates are going to go get them. But at the moment, it's become the wrong. That was the successful strategy. Somehow various strategies made it difficult for pirates to make money, so they're just in other businesses now, which probably includes human trafficking and almost certainly includes gun running. But they can always switch back. The gangs haven't dissipated, so the gangs are still there.
Michael, during this period you were there, did you get a sense how they recruit the pirates? Your friend, did he discuss it with you?
No, they didn't want to go into detail about that. But it was normal to meet brothers, cousins of the other guards and pirate bosses. Mm-hmm. So it was obviously a clan thing. And there was a definite difference between being in the pirate gang and being out of it. So you had to be initiated, you had to be brought in. But I think they did it only with people they trusted, which most of the time meant clan relations.
And once they take the ransom, do they divide it among these people, or they just get a salary for being?
Oh, the guards get a salary, yeah. I think that the amount of money they were going to get was fixed at some point.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, the lady here. Can I?
Hi, I'm from the delegation of the European Union to the U.S., and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the cooperation between, or if there was cooperation between the German government and the U.S. government during the negotiations, and if you think that Europe's soft policy on negotiating maybe influenced the U.S. to kind of, or maybe provide a better example of how to communicate information with your mother and the other negotiators.
I'm not sure about that second part, but I think communication between the two governments was excellent on a certain level. And this was, keep in mind, I was being held during the whole business with Edward Snowden. So everything sort of blew up in 2013, and apparently it didn't affect my case. But that means that the FBI and the BKA communicated at a certain level very well. And above that, that's where most of the problems were, I guess. I don't know if German policy affected the way I was treated by the Americans, because I mean, the FBI was on the case almost immediately. I think that they had to negotiate who was going to take the lead. And in the end, because they thought it was good to have my mother on the phone, and she was in the States, I think the FBI took the lead.
Yes.
Hi, Michael. I have a quick question about, you seem to have a really good timeline of when you were in Somalia and things that had happened. Were you able to track that yourself or kind of figure that out when you came back? Or were you exposed kind of in bits and pieces to news and to dates and things like that to figure out how long you were in Somalia?
Yeah, it was bits and pieces like that. There was a long period where I had nothing. I mean, on the ship at least, there was a calendar. People had some idea of what the day was. For about a year and a half, while I was alone, there was nothing. I didn't have a radio. Sometimes I could ask the guards for the date off their phones, but I actually did lose track of the day. And then towards the end, I had a shortwave radio again, and I could listen to the BBC, and that helped. I realized I think I was 17 days off by that point.
We are going to take the two last questions. Michael in the back, and that gentleman, I just saw another hand. Oh, the lady there, yes.
Thank you very much. Michael Zwern. I work at the Wilson Center. I've spent some time in Somalia, but not nearly as much as you have. I had a question about economic development and livelihoods for all the young men who are involved in piracy and human trafficking on the shores of Puntland. What is the realistic prospects you can say in terms of creating legitimate jobs and opportunities for those folks to participate in an economic development that will not be driven by criminals or piracy?
Yeah, that's
Michael, take another question and then we'll...
Sure.
Yes, please. No, yeah.
You made sure, oh sorry, my name is Quinn Libson and I'm from the Pulitzer Center.
Mm-hmm.
You made sure to reiterate that you would like for the United States to have a rescue policy and to have a consistent rescue policy. And I'm wondering how the inconsistencies directed you or affected you directly. You sort of mentioned that your life changed once that the rescue happened, that it sort of, perhaps they guarded you more closely, or I was just wondering if you could speak more about how the inconsistencies affected you.
Well, since it happened so quickly after I was captured, it's hard to say. I mean, it was only 4 days before that that I have to compare versus the other 2.5 years. So I think they were frightened, but it's actually hard to tell what they did differently. I still don't understand why they took us out of a house and kept us outdoors for so long when the other rescue happened outdoors. I think learning about the rescue gave me hope that I would be rescued while I was there. Once I was kidnapped, in those first couple of days, I didn't have that hope at all because there was no precedent for it. And all of a sudden there was, and I thought, well, this has probably affected my case and somebody's going to come get me otherwise. But these things depend on so many variables that, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not upset with the way things turned out. I'm sitting here, but and there are also other cases, by the way, where families don't want to rescue, and that is really important because you don't want people going in and actually killing a hostage if things go wrong, where it's totally against the will of the family. And that's one, apart from the rescue policy, that's one inconsistency that the hostage policy review has noticed, which is families get told and asked different things. Sometimes they say, look, if the rescue's policy, should we or shouldn't we? Yes or no. That's a really good way to go about it. More detail than that, a family can't handle, I don't think. But not everybody was asked that. And hopefully with the new policy, things will be a little more consistent. The families should absolutely have a say in that sort of thing. So, and if that's true, then a rescue policy won't be totally consistent across the board. So,
Michael's question.
Yeah, about development. It's a really good question. Right now, things are so unstable. So first of all, we say things are unstable in Somalia. That doesn't mean that it's a war zone, but it does mean that when someone tries to build a business or even a building, it's under threat. It's hard to protect. So until there's a real stability in all the regions of Somalia, it's going to be hard to build build the economy back. Right now, piracy and al-Shabaab were, and still are, the main sort of corporate sources of jobs. In other words, if you're young and poor, it makes sense to join one group or the others for the simple reason that you can move up. You know, you can achieve something, you can move up, you can make more money. There's no other structure like that except maybe the UN in small doses in Somalia. And there are all sorts of opportunities, but they need stability to exploit. One thing that I looked into while I was there was while I was free, was the idea of a pipeline, or not even a pipeline, but a sort of transit route from the coast out to Ethiopia, because gas is being discovered in Ethiopia. There are all sorts of other reasons why a direct route from Ethiopia through Somalia to the coast might make sense. It's if you can secure that, make it peaceful for the Ethiopians to move things back and forth, that would be a source of jobs. But right now it's just too unstable. I don't think Ethiopians would trust to have their things go across Somalia. So right now, Somalia is a transit route anyway, but it's for the black market.
Please join me in thanking Michael. We are delighted you are with us.
Thank you.